Hey guys, what's going on? Laying back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about Bartkowiak. Bartkowiak is a Polish action crime movie that tells the story of a man named Tomek Bartkowiak, a disgraced MMA fighter who retires from the sport after being suspected of having taken steroids during competition. Tomek's brother takes pity on him and offers him the opportunity to work at his bar in the city as well as to enroll in MMA stuff once again, but he declines, feeling that he's not passionate about the sport anymore. The brothers leave on good terms, but it's not long until later that day that Tomek gets a phone call and finds out that his brother has been killed in a car crash. With his brother gone and no one else left to run the place, Tomek steps up to the plate, claims ownership, and resumes business as usual at the bar. During his work hours, he begins to notice strange things occurring around the premises of the bar, and he begins to suspect that his brother was actually murdered as opposed to having been killed in a freak accident. And this is what serves as the central focus of the story throughout, as Tomek tries to investigate the mystery behind his brother's death. There's a surprising amount of characters that are featured in this movie's story who both aid and antagonize Tomek's investigation. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them individually throughout this review because honestly there's not a whole lot to say about any of them. Tomek as a protagonist is okay but kind of bland. He has a bit more depth going for him compared to all the other characters throughout the story personality wise, but that's mostly by virtue of him being the main character of the story. I like that he seemed to have a backstory with just about every character in this movie's story, even the villains to a certain extent. It adds an extra layer of depth to his character, even if it's only a little bit, and it gives the audience an extra reason to be invested in his search for answers. I will also say that I think he had the best acting out of any other character in the movie. He seemed to nail the right expression of emotion when a scene called for it, but outside of that, there's not really much else I can say about him. He's more or less just your average Joe Schmo of a protagonist. And like I said, there's a variety of other characters featured in this movie as well, both friend and foe. There's Pavet, who's sort of like Tomek's mentor in that he basically taught him everything he knows when it comes to martial arts. I wasn't really a fan of his character at first, mostly because of how lazily his alcoholism was portrayed at the beginning, but as the action scenes start to ramp up in intensity, he starts to come out of his shell more, he has a lot more things to do, and his dialogue became more lighthearted, so I was able to appreciate him more as a character as the story went along. There's also Pavet's daughter Dominika, who's essentially Tomek's love interest of the story. I do like how supportive she is of his investigation, and there's a really funny scene where she beats up a guy who's sexually harassing her, but other than that, she's pretty much your typical sidekick / damsel in distress. The last character that sort of stuck out to me was Conrad. He's the MMA fighter who knocked out Tomek in his last fight and has since gone on to become a hitman for the main villain of the story. There are a few fun scenes of dialogue where they exchange banter with each other during the more intense moments of the story, but again, he's little more than your average stock bad guy. The conspiracy behind Tomek's brother's death and what's really going on behind the scenes is one of the main selling points this movie has going for it. While I do think it's interesting to a certain extent, I definitely wouldn't say it's original. I like all the little scenes where Tomek and Dominika are scouring across the city looking for clues as to what's going on, for two reasons. One being that the sequences themselves where all this clue hunting takes place are genuinely thrilling, and the second being that the city itself where this movie takes place in is jaw-dropping to look at, although I'm a bit biased myself because I am a huge fan of European architecture. Their investigation leads them to conclude that there is in fact something bigger going on than they realize, and they all revolve around this guy named Konrad. I'm hoping I'm saying his name right, and he wants to buy up all the land around the city for his own dirty deeds. The problem with this idea, however, is I feel like I've seen this exact same concept in at least a dozen movies before it. The movie goes back and forth between Tomek's investigation and the nightclub which he runs and works at. The nightclub scenes provide a nice change of pace and a bit of a break of sorts from the more intense aspects of this movie's story, although the nightclub scenes can occasionally be silly, especially when they involve Steppy D. Honestly though, with how rote and predictable this movie's story is, the action scenes are pretty much the only reason to watch this movie to begin with. Thankfully, the action scenes are a step up from the movie's story, though I wouldn't say by a whole lot. As someone who practices Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on occasion, I was thoroughly impressed and entertained by the variety of holds they showed on screen, how well-timed the choreography was, and how tightly paced all the action was thanks to the editing. Pretty much all the action scenes in this movie were well done. Unfortunately, most of the action scenes early on don't really last that long, only for about 10 to 15 seconds or so. It just doesn't give you enough time to really sink your teeth in and enjoy the moment. However, I will say that the final two action scenes more than made up to them thanks to the introduction introduction of weapons, which added an extra level of danger to Tamek's brawls. As much as I enjoy the action scenes, however, there are a few things that affect my overall enjoyment of them. One is the blood effects. Literally every time someone is punched in the face, there's always a stream of fake CGI blood that comes pouring out of their mouths, but it never lands anywhere you think you see it, like on their body or in the environment around them. It looks tacky, it adds nothing to the intensity of the fight itself, and it may as well not even have been there. Another thing I didn't like about some of this movie's action scenes is that for some reason the cameramen feel the need to get real up close and personal with how they film the action, which results in a lot of unnecessary close-ups of characters' faces. I have no idea why action movies continue to do this to this day, but let me make something abundantly clear. Obscuring the action from the viewer isn't fun, it isn't thrilling, it isn't entertaining, it's annoying. Overall, Bartkowiak is an okay crime story and a slightly above average martial arts movie, but I can't help but feel I've seen it a dozen times already, just with a different coat of paint. If you like martial arts movies and slow burn narratives and can deal with all of the bland characters spread throughout, I think this movie may be somewhat up your alley. Bartkowiak is undoubtedly derivative, but derivative doesn't necessarily mean bad. There are things about its story that I wish were done better, but the action scenes were entertaining enough for me to forget about them, so in the end, I still enjoyed the movie to a certain extent. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of Bartkowiak. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the American rom-com, Resort to Love. Bye bye!